The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 1571. Z is always right. As Z picked himself up off the ground, dirt and rocks falling off his body, the background music started to change. It went from fast-paced and energetic to solemn and powerful. Inspired by anime, Z had decided his path to power long ago. Unlike Lex, who took the best of every opportunity he faced and absorbed it to make it his own, Z merely took inspiration from all external sources, and instead focused on refining himself to the utmost. So while Lex developed a dragon's heart, Z made his own stronger. While Lex learned the sword technique given to him by a Tao Lord, Z only took inspiration from the legacy of the human king. While Lex... The list went on, but in essence, Z walked his own, individual path. It could not be said that any one path was better than the other, just that they were different. Having taken inspiration from anime, as well as the devils who spent the most time inside the inn, Z decided that he needed to have many forms, each stronger than the next. Yet one could not just have another form because they wanted to. So he devised a way in which he could. Gathering momentum was the first step, using that momentum to transform was the next. Obviously, if he had more time to gather momentum, the transformation would be even greater. In truth, this was not technically a flaw in Z's technique. After all, fights between immortals could go on for days if not weeks or months. A fight that lasted just a few minutes was exceptionally rare, for they would have incredible vitality that was not easy to get rid of, not to mention the vast amounts of power. Lex's fights with immortals were the exception, not the norm among immortal fights. The locusts, who were mindless creatures that could not wield laws with any level of expertise, were still easier to kill despite their innate qualities. The Dark Knight, however, not only had formidable strength, his very armor influenced the laws, allowing him to wield a limited number of laws with greater expertise than Z ordinarily. Against such an opponent, a long fight would be required. But as Lex pointed out, the situation didn't allow for a drawn-out fight. Z would have to use some extreme measures. There could be no growth without discomfort. Unlike Lex and Velma, Z didn't only have just one tenet. Instead, he had a number of tenets, yet their essence was fairly simple. It was, perhaps, an idea even more bold than Lex's tenet for supremacy. Z's tenets revolved around the idea that whatever he did was the right and correct way of doing things. That is why when he started to use hand symbols, inspired by an anime about ninja that he saw, his tenets began to work, and the laws were being influenced. Technically, using one's tenet did not require any physical movement or change, but since Z believed that using his hand signs improved the power of his tenets, and whatever he did was clearly right, that's exactly what they did. As the music reached a crescendo, a purple lightning bolt fell from the sky and slammed into Z. Yet instead of suffering as a result of the lightning strike, a purple aura became visible around Z, and his long blonde hair stood up straight. Purple lightning flashed in his eyes as he looked at the Black Knight, and like a flash of lightning, Z disappeared. He was so fast even Lex lost track of him, an incredible feat. But a loud, thunderous boom quickly informed everyone of Z's location. He had appeared right before the Black Knight, punching him straight in the face. Space rippled from the enormity of the power unleashed and the ground erupted underneath the Black Knight, yet that was not even where the real strength of his punch was focused. The real battle was between the laws that Z was using, and the laws within the Knight's black armor. Laws made up everything that existed within the universe, and immortals could influence those laws to behave as they wished. At the Earth immortal level, it was still only influence, and never completely control. The true clash between the Dark Knight and the now clad in purple aura Z was directly between their laws. Z was trying to break the influence that the armor had on laws, which was much harder than it seemed. With every attack, with every technique, Z tried to whittle down the armor's influence on the laws, while the Dark Knight tried to shatter Z's tenets. It was an incredibly dangerous way to fight, and not usually how immortals fought. It was too risky. Lex, who was observing the fight, suddenly gained enlightenment about how he could improve his defense by imbuing it with laws, just like that armor. The laws need not be relevant to defense at all. They need not even be used. Their very existence will make the defense much harder to break due to how stable laws themselves were. Conversely, it would similarly be difficult to imbue those laws to begin with. A new bead appeared above the Go board, but this one was not the normal, round bead that Lex usually summoned. Instead, it was in the shape of a shield, and Lex instinctively knew that the 10 tiles around this bead could never be attacked by the rook piece, or any other piece. He immediately placed it near the few beads he had placed on the board, protecting them, and gaining new insight into the fight he was having in his mind. But he didn't have time to dwell on that. "Luther, we have more guests. Make sure they don't disturb Z. Go to the Great Hall and try out the weapons that were installed in the walls." From afar, he could see a new tide of locusts appear, and leading them seemed to be what Cayman called a king locust. They were the perfect opponents to test out exactly how strong the castle really was. Chapter 1572 3 Armies. Even if Lex told Z to hurry up, it was basically impossible for Z to quickly finish up a fight Lex didn't even think he could win in the first place. That didn't mean that Lex would interrupt the fight before it was needed. Simultaneously, Z's fight could not be disturbed. Although Z's music was lethal to the locusts, under the protection of their king, they could pretty much ignore its influence and march right up to him. In truth, if they didn't rely on their passive ability and actively resisted the music, they'd be able to survive. But even in their mindless form they were too difficult a foe for most, let alone if they gained a measure of intelligence. Lex simply watched from the rampart as an ever-increasingly nervous Cayman stood by the sides. He was nervous not because he feared the Locust King. Rather, he did not want the Midnight Tavern to fall before he and his men returned to top form. While he had some reservations about Lex's attitude towards Abaddon, he could not deny that as a host and as a tavern keeper, he was doing a first-class job. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," finally Cayman said, unable to hold himself back. "All I suggest is that you stay fully prepared in case your defense doesn't hold as you expect it to. A Locust King is not a weakling." Lex nodded, and as if to reassure Cayman, told Leonidas to be prepared to venture forth at a moment's notice. The entire battalion was battle-ready. All they needed was the command, and they'd be deployed on the field. Lex, himself, did not move however. He stayed in the perfect position to monitor the situation. Back when Luther had been helping him craft the castle, he had warned Lex that he needed to purify the malevolent influence of hellfire, or it would taint the castle. Lex took another approach instead. As Luther sat down on the throne in the Great Hall, and gained complete control over the tavern, he finally gained an understanding of what Lex had done, and marveled at how he had managed to tame the very influence of hell itself. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Lex could control divine energy, so it would only be normal for him to be able to control malevolent energy. If anyone else in the universe heard Luther's rationale, they would first laugh at him. Then they would kill Lex. A force capable of controlling the energies of both hell and heaven was something the devils and angels had been conspiring to achieve for billions of years, facing strong opposition. Now, Lex was on the verge of achieving it himself unbeknownst to anyone. The only reason he would be able to do such a thing was his cultivation technique. However, Lex had not actually done that. In fact, Lex had never even tried to use malevolent energy, and instead used supremacy to bind the malevolent influence of hell to the castle so that it could be unleashed in a tamed manner. Perhaps that is also why no one in the universe had yet noticed how close he was to achieving the dream of two powerful races by accident. The castle walls trembled, and countless machicolations revealed themselves on the outer walls through which liquid fire started to pour out. Liquid fire was not the same as lava, it was something far more sinister. Just as the fire was about to touch the ground, it morphed, taking on the shape of a hellhound made entirely of flames. As the fire poured out of the castle walls, more and more hounds began to appear, each one just as crazed and hungry as the locusts themselves. Within the span of a few seconds, an army of hellhounds stood at the base of the castle walls, and all it would take was a single command from Luther for them to attack. But the command didn't come. The castle had one more weapon Lex had prepared, so Luther wanted to test that out too. While fires flowed out of the walls, thick white clouds began to flow out of the tower windows. White clouds were not unusual, except that the clouds were emitting a chill so piercing just looking at them was enough to give frostbite. As the white clouds rose high, they eventually began to morph, taking on the shape of many wyverns. With icy wyverns up above, and fiery hellhounds down below, the two weapons of the tavern castle had been deployed in full force. Oftentimes, when one thought of a hell, they usually thought of fire and burning, but in truth many hells were also icy, and equally as terrifying and malevolent. Using Fenrir's Ice Age attack as a foundation, Lex had allowed the malevolent energy that tainted the castle to manifest in two different ways. The sight was intimidating, for not only had two armies been summoned virtually out of thin air, they radiated a ferocious aura of hell, intimidating anyone who felt it. In truth, the number of these creatures that could be summoned was not limitless, and would require an external energy source. Similarly, the malevolent energy that was used to create them could be temporarily exhausted. That was why Lex sent Luther to summon them. While the energy source could be any number of things, from spirit stones, to individuals, to power plants of some kind, Luther's hellfire was an important ingredient in resupplying the tavern with malevolent energy, enabling him to summon a lot more of them than anyone else. The most insidious thing about these conjurations summoned using malevolence was that as they fought and killed and ate their enemies, they would grow stronger. Just as the locusts were about to near Z, Luther sent the command, and the armies leapt forward, eager to meet their foes. The three armies clashed headfirst without slowing down whatsoever, causing a massive explosion filled with fire and ice. The locusts, whose very bodies were fused with strange laws that caused them to live without souls and recover without end, soon began to be devoured by the hellhounds and wyverns, while the hellhounds and wyverns started to grow larger in size every time they killed a foe. Chapter 1573 I Watch Anime 2i. Before Lex was a land covered in total chaos. Armies carrying the malevolent aura of hell clashed against the abominable armies of Abaddon. The Locust King was far superior to the level of the armies, and at first caused incredible destruction with every wave of his hand. Lex even considered personally making a move to constrict him for a while, but it turned out to be unnecessary. The hellhounds and wyverns grew stronger with each kill, and were like soldiers under Luther's command. The weaklings distracted the king, while those who grew strong devoured even more locusts, speeding up their growth. It was a race to see if the king could kill enough of the tavern's armies, or if the two conjured armies could strengthen enough of its members to take on the king. Either way, a stalemate of sorts seemed to be reached far away from Z, allowing him to continue his fight in peace, if that made any sense. But there was no peace to be had. Even though Z was punching the night with everything he had, even though he was trying to affect its armor, even though he had an awesome cape, and even though he had entered his first transformation, he was losing. Z could feel it deep within his bones, he was losing. His attacks weren't strong enough, his defenses not tough enough, and his transformation not transformed enough. Given the unfavorable conditions, this was the best he could do, yet it was not good enough. Not only would this not speed up the end of the fight enough, he could tell that unless something changed, within 6 to 8 hours, Z would be the one to falter. Now faltering and being defeated were far from the same, but in Z's case it might as well be the same thing. Faltering would mean losing his momentum, and that was akin to death. Not only would this not speed up the end of the fight enough, he could tell that unless something changed, within 6 to 8 hours, Z would be the one to falter. Now faltering and being defeated were far from the same, but in Z's case it might as well be the same thing. Faltering would mean losing his momentum, and that was akin to death. This was his current limit as long as he fought in a stable, risk-free manner. Yet how could it be a training arc if he only fought stably? What he had to do now was use the techniques he had been pondering, but either he had not fully mastered yet, or not fully created yet. The reason they were still in the experimental stage was because they were vastly more powerful, and thus required a lot more thought and planning before they could be used without harming his body. Do you know who the coolest character is in an anime? Z asked the Black Knight, though he was not expecting an answer. It is those who dress in black, the knight responded, as if he was well familiar with anime. Wrong. It's neither those who dress in black, nor is it the main character. Instead, it's the main character's friend or teacher who has a badass eye technique that's a super powerful attack. The purple lightning within Z's eye converged into his pupils, and shot out of his eye like a blast of laser. This happened at the speed of light, leaving the armored knight no time to respond. The purple lightning struck the black armor and caused it to cave in, resulting in a massive dent in the chest. In fact, there was even a small rip in the very center of the dent, revealing a hint of the creature's skin below. The most important thing was that the structure of the armor was significantly important to maintaining the laws within. Once the armor was deformed, a significant amount of its ability to manipulate laws deteriorated. With a single attack, the knight became weaker, but Z2 did not escape without harm. He had to close both eyes as streams of blood dripped down his eyes, as if he were crying blood. The fact that he had been able to attack without rupturing his eyes was a miracle, but they did not escape unharmed. Unless they were treated, they would not be usable anymore. Even his body's natural healing would be insufficient to heal them, for that purple lightning contained an immense amount of destructive power influenced by the law of lightning. But the loss of his eyes did not blind him. Instead, Z took advantage of the opening he created, as well as the armor's tear, and dashed forward. All the purple aura that was surrounding his body concentrated around his right index finger, causing it to carry all his energy and momentum. Having already suffered from an unexpectedly strong attack, the knight tried to dodge the attack, but just wasn't fast enough. Z's finger tore through the opening in the armor and stabbed into the creature's body, causing a massive explosion contained within the remaining armor. Sensing both the declining state of his body and the weakening power of the creature, Z didn't hesitate to continue the onslaught. Showing a grave expression as if he had made a very serious decision, Z asked the Black Knight another question. "Do you know what's a cool way to end a boss fight?" he asked. "A one-hit kill," the Black Knight responded, giving Z pause. "Well, I can't deny you're wrong. But in the absence of the ability to one-hit kill, you use a special move or technique that you have been training for a long time." This time, the Black Knight did not give Z the chance to attack. Instead, he unleashed a devastating strike of his own, attacking from an unexpected angle, taking Z by surprise. There was no time to dodge, and no time to set up a defense. An armored glove connected with Z's face, causing an enormous explosion. The canyon floor tumbled as a massive dust cloud filled the air, and blew away the dark clouds that had gathered up above, revealing once more the red sky. Cayman's expression fell, though Lex only turned his head oddly. Why did it seem to him like Z was playing a video game? There was the sound of another strike, and a heavy gust of wind blew away the dust, revealing what was happening inside. Chapter 1574. I watch anime too. Z was standing above a kneeling armored knight, this time a red aura around his body, and a small dagger in his hand. From afar, it almost looked like a like a steak knife. "Have you been holding back this entire time?" the Black Knight asked, looking at Z oddly. "Not really. Using my second form means I'll exhausted all my energy and need to go to a recovery pod for days. I didn't want to use it, but I had no choice." "Should I act like a defeated villain, and ask how you did it?" the knight asked. His voice was strained, yet oddly lacking the kind of emotions one would expect from someone about to be defeated. "I have a powerful bloodline called Regalia Bloom. It allows me to manipulate energy through my weapons. But that doesn't really suit my style, so I've been working on a way to manipulate energy through my body instead, unlocking my second form. Unfortunately, my body isn't strong enough to tolerate the laws that allow my bloodline to so easily take control of external energy, nor can I rely solely on my body, hence the knife. But, even in its incomplete state, my second form allows me to use all the energy around me to my will, making me as strong as I want to be. For you, unfortunately, that means that the power of your attacks only serves as my fuel. Do you have any last words?" The knight looked at Z for a while, then turned to look at the castle in the distance. "Before I died, I too was from Earth. I sensed the aura of Earth on another, and came to see my fellow planet made. Unfortunately for me, it seems I won't be able to see him just yet. Unfortunately for you, I also grew up watching anime. Z suddenly felt an immense danger, and rushed to strike the knight with his knife, but it was too late. A beam of black light, if such a thing were possible, shot out of the armor, before the armor exploded in its entirety. Z was neither able to attack the knight in time, nor could he block the attack. Instead, he was forced to divert all the energy from the explosion away from himself. His transformation allowed him to handle a lot more energy than he could have just simply using regalia bloom, but the downside was that the more energy he converted, the more damage his body would take. Diverting away the energy from an attack that would otherwise kill him only caused him a grave injury. The trade wasn't bad, but Z grimaced even so. He could tell that the Dark Knight wasn't dead, and that he would be back. It seemed he had himself an adversary. The red aura around Z began to fade away, and weakness quickly began to replace the strength he had, causing him to stumble. Yet before he could catch himself, Lex appeared beside him and held him steady. That was not bad. You did better than I expected, he said honestly. Yet the praise stung Z, for this was the first time he had received praise for failing. He's not dead. He'll be back. I failed to catch him for interrogation. Yeah, Luther's sulking in the Great Hall now that he has no one to interrogate, Lex said with a chuckle. But don't be too hard on yourself. You did well against a stronger opponent. Next time, you'll do better. It's going to take me weeks in the recovery pod to come back to fighting condition. It's likely the Black Knight will be back long before then. Well, you're right about the fact that the Black Knight will probably be back sooner than that, said Lex. But you're wrong about your recovery time. You think I'm holding your shoulder for, what, balance? Z, startled, turned his attention towards his shoulder where Lex had grabbed him from, and noticed that his body was already visibly recovering. There was no warm aura, no cooling effect or anything like that. Lex was simply, directly healing him. What's more, there were various intents hidden in his body, yet under Lex's influence they seemed to melt away. Shocked, Z looked back at Lex, then just rolled his eyes. Of course he shouldn't be shocked. It made total sense. The Earth immortal human who could fight heavenly immortals, probably, and gave death threats to demi-Dao lords on the weekends of course knew how to heal as well. He probably learned in one weekend when he was off saving a galaxy or something. Z bet Lex could heal souls and spirits too, because why wouldn't he be able to do that? Just because it was one of the most difficult things to do? No, that was no barrier to Lex. Not content with rolling his eyes once, Z rolled his eyes again. He wouldn't be surprised if Lex learned to heal just so that Z couldn't take sick days. He would be forced to work always. How was anyone with a sane mind supposed to believe Lex was just an Earth immortal? Honestly, he should have worked more on his disguise, like riding in on a Jorlum. That would probably be less conspicuous. By the way, I'm going to fuse a drop of Jorlum Heart's blood into your body. It will make you much stronger, and much more resilient to the effects of laws on your body and soul, said Lex, as if it was the most casual thing in the universe. Z would have rolled his eyes a third time, but Lex was currently healing his eyes so he had to make do with a groan. Also, I like your transformations, but you're wasting your aura by just making it visible. Instead, why don't you also imbue it with certain powers? Let me give you a few ideas. Lex began to improve Z's techniques on the fly, because that was totally so normal. He felt Lex was just showing off at this point, but that didn't stop him from listening to the advice. It was good. 1575 The hero is the bad guy's brother. While the battle in front of the castle raged on, within the tavern the reaving dread were receiving some well-deserved care and attention. Almost 90% of them had laid down in recovery pods, and many of those had even fallen asleep. This behavior was as a result on the ingrained instincts of a soldier. Any time they received even the slightest hint of free time, they would either sleep, eat, or heal themselves. This was not because they were lazy or had bad habits. Instead, all three of those helped them recover to their most battle-ready state possible. Within recovery pods they could both sleep and heal, which was a 2-for-1 they would never waste. If they could somehow fit eating into that as well, they certainly would have. The reason, then, that the number in the recovery pod was only 90%, and not 99.99% excluding only Cayman, was because of another rule that the soldiers abided by. On a mission, regardless of the circumstances, they never fully lowered their guard. So while the most critically injured recovered and rested, those who were less injured stayed nearby to keep guard. Of course, they did not make their intentions obvious, and even spread out so that it looked like they were actually enjoying the tavern's services. This could simultaneously be considered intel gathering. Such professionalism, despite being pushed to their physical and mental limits, is exactly what made them the best of the best. Of the services that the remaining members enjoyed, the one that got the most attention was, naturally, the bar. Regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of cultivation level, it was practically a law of the universe that soldiers loved their drinks. Compared to the rest of the castle, the bar was only dimly lit, with blinds covering the windows, limiting the red light coming in from outside. The thick scent of void agarwood filled the room, and there was actually a fairy in the corner playing the flute. This fairy had originally been a music player within the first tavern Lex had built, back in the Crystal Realm. Later on, he joined the inn and became a full-fledged worker, though what he liked most was playing music. The sounds of hustle and bustle, of relieved laughter and excited chatter covered the gentle melody, yet the fairy didn't mind. In fact, it felt that the sounds of enjoyment were the ultimate complement to its music. Yet on a table on the far side of the room sat a small group, eyeing everyone suspiciously even as they drank warm vanilla-flavored milk from their giant mugs. "Don't be ridiculous, Malfoy," said a bull, a milk mustache clearly evident on its face. "How can this be an illusion? We've received reinforcements before. The tavern fits the style of all the strange reinforcements we've gotten before. Heck, it certainly beats that group of cobblers who suddenly appeared to back us up. Though I'll admit, they made good shoes when they weren't busy dying. Trust me, Moo. This is one of Abaddon's tricks. Since it couldn't beat us in a fight, it's beating us by breaking us from within. The reason we can even talk like this is because they're focused more on Cayman than us. That's why he's been separated from us. Trust me, if you try to meet him, they'll prevent you from doing it. We have to find a way of informing the others and mounting a rescue. I don't know, it seems pretty silly to try to defeat us by healing our wounds and restoring our strength," said Moo with a look of hesitation, yet Malfoy was insistent. "Do you have any proof?" asked a third member on the table. As the three discussed amongst ourselves, they didn't notice that sitting right beside them was a wolf, a kuan-pung and a soul bird. Covered by Fenrir's stealth technique, the three of them were entirely undetectable unless someone could see through Fenrir's bloodline ability. Though, at this point, Lex was certain that it wasn't that they couldn't talk, but that they refused to talk. Not that it mattered. Among immortals, verbal communication was one of the least efficient forms of speaking, and an exchange in spirit sense was more than enough to communicate. After a round of chatting amongst themselves, they seemed like they came to a conclusion of what they were going to do. The three of them vanished from where they sat, as if they were never there in the first place. Malfoy grit his teeth and was about to reveal the ultimate truth when he suddenly felt something. He felt like he was being observed. He turned around quickly, and saw a bird perched on the windowsill, staring at him ominously. "I think we've been discovered," he exclaimed, yet the moment he brought everyone's attention to the window, the bird was gone. Chills spread down Malfoy's back as he realized that he had been discovered, and had been warned. The others were still unconvinced, yet he was no longer in the mood to convince them. "Excuse me for a moment," he said with a trembling voice, and quickly scurried out of the bar, his mind racing. Yet just as he was about to leave, he felt the same sensation. He turned around, and once again, on the same windowsill, the bird sat there, watching only him. "I must warn the others," he muttered and ran out. Yet no matter where he went, or who he crossed, the feeling like someone was watching him wouldn't go away. In fact, he practically felt like there was someone right behind him, breathing down his neck. Yet whenever he turned to look, he was alone. Startled, frightened and distraught, Malfoy went into the bathroom and washed his face. Even if he was being watched, at least no one was doing anything to him yet. That meant he still had time. As he was trying to come up with a strategy in his mind on how to tackle the situation, he heard a knocking sound. He looked up, and in the mirror he saw, instead of his reflection, a frozen statue of himself, crying out in despair, surrounded by a deep darkness. Within that darkness, he could see a pair of wolf's eyes, staring right into his soul. 1576 The hero is the bad guy's brother too. Malfoy was startled and nearly fell back, but he was a soldier at heart. Even if he was scared, he would fight, not run. Since he was exposed, he attacked the mirror, yet his attack bounced off it like it was nothing. The next second, everything returned to normal. Malfoy was standing in the bathroom, and his reflection was absolutely normal. There was no frozen statue, and there was no shadowy wolf staring at him. Malfoy snorted, and was about to turn away when he noticed something in the reflection. There was a window showing the outside of the castle, and outside he saw Cayman standing on the ramparts, watching 3 armies fight. An idea flashed in his eyes and he quickly approached the window and propped it open. After looking left and right, making sure that there were no problems, Malfoy leaped from the window, intent on reaching Cayman. Yet the moment he jumped, a familiar feeling returned. From the windowsill of the bathroom window, a bird was watching him. Its gaze alone was enough to unnerve him, as if it carried within its body a star. That brief distraction caused Malfoy to miss his target, and instead of jumping towards the ramparts, he leaped towards a rooftop greenhouse built atop a tower. Oddly enough, the glass of the greenhouse did not obstruct Malfoy, and allowed him to fall within. Yet Malfoy was not relieved. Instead, he pulled out his weapons and prepared to face a formidable adversary. At a glance, the greenhouse seemed empty, the many trees, bushes, and small potted plants placed neatly in rows on the ground or on shelves. A large island of dirt in the center of the room housed many especially rare herbs that could attract the greed of even Earth immortals, yet Malfoy paid attention to none of that. The eerie silence in the greenhouse did not match the environment of the rest of the tavern, and it was clear that something terrible was about to happen. Just as he had that thought, a familiar feeling returned. A bird was watching him from somewhere, but Malfoy didn't have time to search for a giant wolf suddenly appeared, staring at him as it passed the trees. With each step the wolf took, its aura rose, so much so that its mere presence alone began to press on Malfoy. Yet the intimidating pressure only strengthened Malfoy's grip on his weapon. He had not taken a single step in retreat when he faced the horrors of Abaddon, and he would not retreat now. For a few moments, the wolf kept staring at Malfoy, the pressure increasing still. Then, without any prior warning, it pounced. Malfoy raised his weapon, ready to fight back. Yet the destined clash never came. A sonorous howl bellowed through the hall, shaking the very ground and the sky, startling the wolf. It gave Malfoy one last, malicious look before disappearing, alongside the staring bird, as if they were running from something. At the same time, Malfoy felt the arrival of a heroic aura, pushing away all that was foul, as if coming to his rescue. From the skies arrived a being of magnificent grace, its wings more pure than that of angels, its body a testament to power and grace combined. The flying leviathan, no, the Kuan-Pung appeared right before Malfoy, its aura driving away all the impurity and insidiousness that this place hid. For some reason, Malfoy felt incredibly safe around it, as if he had been rescued. As Malfoy marveled at the sight of a legendary creature, nearly extinct in the whole universe, the Kuan-Pung searched the greenhouse for any signs of its enemies, yet did not find them. Finally, the Kuan-Pung turned to Malfoy, and connected its spirit sense to his. "Are you injured, child?" A cute little voice, clearly trying to sound deep, asked Malfoy. The immortal, who was well over 1,000 years old, looked at the young Kuan-Pung with an odd expression. "You are lucky I arrived in time," the adorable voice said, trying to sound serious. "You have somehow attracted the attention of the twin evils. If they managed to get to you, it would not be death you would face, but corruption. Are you also trapped here in this evil tavern?" Malfoy asked. "No, I am not trapped. I am this tavern's protector. The twin evils you saw, Sunny and Fenrir, were once protectors too. But a truly insidious evil got to them and infected them, causing them to try and ruin this place. Yet, as long as I am here, they will never succeed. A light suddenly shone down from the sky, as if giving the turtle a spotlight. Malfoy couldn't even see a source for the light. It was as if it just appeared. Can you tell me what happened? How did they get infected? My army is staying at the tavern, and they're in danger. Fret not, child. As long as I am here, I will never let your friends come to harm. It is my responsibility. After all, once upon a time, the twin evils were my twin brothers. The Kuan-Pung said the last line extremely dramatically, as if revealing a great secret. The wolf and the bird were your twin brothers? Malfoy asked, highly confused. Yes, we three were all born each other's twins, Little Blue said firmly. Wouldn't that make you triplets? Yes, exactly. We three are twin brothers, Little Blue said, ignoring Malfoy's question, as it tried to recall its lines as it began its monologue. You see, we three were all protectors of this place once. But then, the unthinkable happened. My brothers discovered Reddit, and they were never the same again. In an incredibly precious, yet solemn voice, Little Blue began to recite the lines Fenrir had prepared for it. The parts he couldn't remember, he filled in on his own. It was a highly convincing performance. 1576 The hero is the bad guy's brother too. Malfoy was startled and nearly fell back, but he was a soldier at heart. Even if he was scared, he would fight, not run. Since he was exposed, he attacked the mirror, yet his attack bounced off it like it was nothing. The next second, everything returned to normal. Malfoy was standing in the bathroom, and his reflection was absolutely normal. There was no frozen statue, and there was no shadowy wolf staring at him. Malfoy snorted, and was about to turn away when he noticed something in the reflection. There was a window showing the outside of the castle, and outside he saw Cayman standing on the ramparts, watching three armies fight. An idea flashed in his eyes and he quickly approached the window and propped it open. After looking left and right, making sure that there were no problems, Malfoy leaped from the window, intent on reaching Cayman. Yet the moment he jumped, a familiar feeling returned. From the windowsill of the bathroom window, a bird was watching him. Its gaze alone was enough to unnerve him, as if it carried within its body a star. That brief distraction caused Malfoy to miss his target, and instead of jumping towards the ramparts, he leaped towards a rooftop greenhouse built atop a tower. Oddly enough, the glass of the greenhouse did not obstruct Malfoy, and allowed him to fall within. Yet Malfoy was not relieved. Instead, he pulled out his weapons and prepared to face a formidable adversary. At a glance, the greenhouse seemed empty, the many trees, bushes, and small potted plants placed neatly in rows on the ground or on shelves. A large island of dirt in the center of the room housed many especially rare herbs that could attract the greed of even Earth immortals, yet Malfoy paid attention to none of that. The eerie silence in the greenhouse did not match the environment of the rest of the tavern, and it was clear that something terrible was about to happen. Just as he had that thought, a familiar feeling returned. A bird was watching him from somewhere, but Malfoy didn't have time to search for a giant wolf suddenly appeared, staring at him as it passed the trees. With each step the wolf took, its aura rose, so much so that its mere presence alone began to press on Malfoy. Yet the intimidating pressure only strengthened Malfoy's grip on his weapon. He had not taken a single step in retreat when he faced the horrors of Abaddon, and he would not retreat now. For a few moments, the wolf kept staring at Malfoy, the pressure increasing still. Then, without any prior warning, it pounced. Malfoy raised his weapon, ready to fight back. Yet the destined clash never came. A sonorous howl bellowed through the hall, shaking the very ground and the sky, startling the wolf. It gave Malfoy one last, malicious look before disappearing, alongside the staring bird, as if they were running from something. At the same time, Malfoy felt the arrival of a heroic aura, pushing away all that was foul, as if coming to his rescue. From the skies arrived a being of magnificent grace, its wings more pure than that of angels, its body a testament to power and grace combined. The flying leviathan, no, the Kuan-Pung appeared right before Malfoy, its aura driving away all the impurity and insidiousness that this place hid. For some reason, Malfoy felt incredibly safe around it, as if he had been rescued. As Malfoy marveled at the sight of a legendary creature, nearly extinct in the whole universe, the Kuan-Pung searched the greenhouse for any signs of its enemies, yet did not find them. Finally, the Kuan-Pung turned to Malfoy, and connected its spirit sense to his. "Are you injured, child?" A cute little voice, clearly trying to sound deep, asked Malfoy. The immortal, who was well over 1,000 years old, looked at the young Kuan-Pung with an odd expression. "You are lucky I arrived in time," the adorable voice said, trying to sound serious. "You have somehow attracted the attention of the twin evils. If they managed to get to you, it would not be death you would face, but corruption. Are you also trapped here in this evil tavern?" Malfoy asked. "No, I am not trapped. I am this tavern's protector. The twin evils you saw, Sunny and Fenrir, were once protectors too. But a truly insidious evil got to them and infected them, causing them to try and ruin this place. Yet, as long as I am here, they will never succeed." A light suddenly shone down from the sky, as if giving the turtle a spotlight. Malfoy couldn't even see a source for the light. It was as if it just appeared. "Can you tell me what happened? How did they get infected?" "My army is staying at the tavern, and they're in danger." "Fret not, child. As long as I am here, I will never let your friends come to harm. It is my responsibility. After all, once upon a time, the twin evils were my twin brothers." The Kuan-Pung said the last line extremely dramatically, as if revealing a great secret. "The wolf and the bird were your twin brothers?" Malfoy asked, highly confused. "Yes, we three were all born each other's twins," Little Blue said firmly. "Wouldn't that make you triplets?" "Yes, exactly. We three are twin brothers," Little Blue said, ignoring Malfoy's question, as it tried to recall its lines as it began its monologue. "You see, we three were all protectors of this place once. But then, the unthinkable happened. My brothers discovered Reddit, and they were never the same again." In an incredibly precious, yet solemn voice, Little Blue began to recite the lines Fenrir had prepared for it. The parts he couldn't remember, he filled in on his own. It was a highly convincing performance. 1577 Meanwhile while the armies of the castle tavern fought, while Z learned from Lex how to be more unreasonable, while the three beast twins played around with the mercenaries, the universe had not come to a halt. In fact, Lex was aware of the fact that the flow of time within Abaddon was unusual and variable. From one second to the next, the flow of time in Abaddon could change compared to the rest of the universe without rhyme or reason. One moment it could be slower than the Midnight Realm, and the next second it could be double the speed of the Midnight Realm. That made it incredibly confusing to keep track, and very unpredictable. Fortunately, Lex's immortal mind could keep track. Within the Midnight Realm, at that time, the death match between Jotun and the ruler of the fiery mammoths had begun. As per the Henali Convention, this was how battle between galactic civilizations, meaning civilizations where travel between galaxies was possible, was to be conducted. Such fights put the burden of conquest on the top few of both civilizations instead of the bottom many, and allowed the outcome to be determined with minimal damage to the galaxies and star systems. So far, there had been 24 death matches. 8 of those fights were between heavenly immortal generals of Jotun, and similarly ranked beasts. 16 of those matches had been between Earth immortals. The last fight was to be between celestial immortals. The Jotun Empire had won 13 of the previous 24 fights, but lost 11. Considering that these were death matches held within the inn, such a ratio meant that both forces had suffered greatly. If any one of the civilizations had won 70% of the matches, then the final match between the rulers would not have taken place. However, since it did not, the fight had now begun. The reason that the Henali Convention was organized in this way was to dissuade fights between civilizations. They wanted the origin realm to prosper, not get involved in unnecessary fights. Unfortunately, sometimes, these fights were unavoidable. Emperor Jotun appeared on a barren stretch of land that seemed to go on forever, with a pitch-black sky above him. There was vast amounts of nothingness all around, which was fine because if anything existed within that space, it would have been destroyed anyway. The ruler of the fiery mammoth stood before Jotun, its body an enormous well of power the mere sight of which could destroy an ordinary heavenly immortal. It was not without reason that, with only a single galaxy at their disposal, they had managed to confront the Jotun Empire which had so many galaxies. The fact that they had been able to produce so many heavenly immortals using the resources of a single galaxy was, in truth, even more formidable than the spread of the Jotun Empire. Most galaxies in the origin lacked a single heaven immortal altogether. This wasn't because of lack of talent, or even lack of resources. Instead, it was because even a single galaxy was an incredibly vast space to search for immortals. In truth, enough resources existed to promote numerous Earth immortals to heaven immortals, yet in most cases, those resources could never be found, or their worth was unidentified. Relatively speaking, it was easier to simply occupy another galaxy where heaven immortal grade resources had already been found than to look for them within one's own galaxy. Of course, there were incredibly complex ways to induce the birth of such resources, or attract them over large distances, but that was not something just anyone could do. Daoist Borin, you should have never crossed the Jotun Empire, Jotun said as he summoned a large, gold axe. Why not? It will soon be my domain, and humans will have to assume their rightful place as slaves, Borin, the mammoth ruler stated, not a shred of doubt in his voice. Jotun merely shook his head. You may think that I was chosen as a representative of the Henali due to my dashing good looks, but actually, it's because of something else. Let me show you. Jotun began to casually step forward, his skin turning obsidian in color as his body changed from organic into something else entirely. What Jotun was displaying was the unique bloodline he had created. He called it Black Hole. I thank you in advance for contributing to my rising cultivation, he muttered, his voice alone carrying with it the power of firmament, one of the 8 ruling laws of the universe. The mammoth was not afraid, and turned his body into star fire. In that moment, his mere body alone could replace a star in a functional star system without issue. A hush fell over the Midnight Inn, as everyone could feel the auras of the 2 celestial beings without being suppressed by it. All eyes were on the screen, as a fight between celestial immortals was not something seen every day. In fact, even a number of heavenly immortal dragons, and one particularly obese celestial immortal dragon had also shown up to the inn to watch the fight. Besides them, a number of extremely prominent and powerful races had made their way to the inn, including Zarkon, the previous winner of the Henali tourney, and a Jinn, one of the rarest races in the universe. It was because all eyes were on the match, or on the arrival of the truly famous guests, that no one seemed to notice that in a corner of the inn, the latest Lich Guard was standing before Anita, the inn's very own Lich. The two said nothing, but had a silent confrontation nevertheless. The guard was a celestial immortal, and a traditional Lich, while Anita was the very personification of beauty and holiness. Not only was her very appearance counter to a normal Lich's appearance, she was even giving birth to a non-undead entity which was highly controversial. Lastly, she seemed to lack a phylactery, which just didn't make sense for a Lich. Despite her many oddities, she was definitely a Lich, for the guard could feel a certain threat from her that only a Lich could produce. She could, if the circumstances were right, steal control of his many undead soldiers. 1578 Meanwhile too. No words were exchanged between the two, and yet they came to a certain conclusion. The Lich Guard was much stronger, but in Anita's opinion, it was an inferior grade of Lich. Such a conclusion naturally enraged the Lich, and he nearly attacked her right then and there, but a prompt from his system brought him back to reality. Oh, also his senses telling him that should he try anything funny at the moment, he would instantly be converted into fertilizer. If you want to learn to be better, don't act like a toddler. Locking yourself in your room won't help you make any friends either, Anita scolded. Weak thing, are you really in any position to tell me what to do? You are a speck of dirt in front of me. Yes, an attitude like that won't help you make friends either. Come back to me when you're ready to talk like a grown-up. Anita simply turned around and walked away without a care. The Thulu baby, who could now control its size and had shrunk adequately so that it could be carried by Anita, simply stared at the lich. Eventually, it did the Cthulhu equivalent of sticking out its tongue, which was to wave its many tentacles at the lich. The celestial lich was provoked once more, but it could feel itself being observed by some powerful entity, and subject to some great causality. It dared not cause a problem. The security of the inn was great, even without his addition, he knew that much. In the end, he could do nothing but watch the woman leave. Elsewhere inside the inn, something was happening that Lex had not expected for another few thousand years at the very least. Liz's fusion with Nemo was coming to an end. Liz's eyes flickered, and she woke up to find herself in an unfamiliar environment. But her mind was not slow to recall what had happened, and she quickly checked on her condition. "Good morning, sunshine," said Nemo as it swam on her skin in the form of a small goldfish tattoo. "Are you ready for an adventure? What's going on?" I feel like our fusion went a lot faster than it should have," Liz said, feeling bewildered. She was struggling to come to terms with the incredible power she was feeling within her body. She felt like she could arm wrestle a dragon. What's more, her cultivation had dropped, and she was back to being in the chi training realm, but she didn't mind at all. She could tell that she needed to cultivate in a unique way now. More importantly, she had unlocked her fusion form. She could now fuse with Nemo to demonstrate an immense amount of power that she couldn't even fathom. Well, yes, that's right. And I was enjoying the little nap that the fusion caused, but there's a lot of fun little fellows at the inn right now, and I feel like we could have a lot of fun with them, so I finished up the fusion quicker. Now we can go on an adventure. But that's now how it's supposed to work," muttered a bewildered Liz. It couldn't be helped. She would soon learn that how it was supposed to work was exactly according to the whims of a sovereign. While these, relatively small-scale events were occurring, it just so happened that another, major event was happening at the same time that would rock the entire universe. It was just that the people involved hadn't realized it yet. Within the Artika realm, the Artika race Tao lords were overseeing the ongoing New Age Expo. Despite their firm control over their realm, they encountered countless issues as a result of the many guests that they welcomed, ranging from personal issues of important delegates to political issues that threatened to turn into potential rivalries. While the Artika race were steadfast in their beliefs of right and wrong, they were not foolish enough to needlessly provoke the whole universe. They understood that practicing morality came from a position of strength, or at least, that's how they did it. They also had to deal with the fact that after their realm matured, it underwent many unexpected changes. They were all too familiar with their realm, and yet so much had changed. It was not just the level specifically for Tao lords that was the issue. So many new materials, new environments, new rules appeared once the realm matured. That was because the birth of certain materials required a stability in the form of energy, environment and rules that only mature realms could provide. It was as a result of this rule itself that many were looking forward to the next coming era. "I'll work on it, but the library does as it wishes." Instead of responding to our invitation, I heard it cataloged the invite inside a history book. 8:39. "I've just got word. We have received a letter of intent from the 7 deadly brothers. They wish to enter the realm, and the realm lord has accepted. Many of the forces feel uneasy about our decision," said one of the Artika Tao lords. "It is good to make alliances with powerful individuals. They're more easy to predict and understand than powerful organizations. There's too much internal politics with organizations. Even so, go ahead and prepare a space for them lest there be any issues. I expect they will be bringing an extensive entourage as well, so try to ensure that the entourage ends up together, whichever level of the realm they end up in." Got it. I'm getting another report about a new ore that was discovered. It's similar to a spirit stone, but it's exuding divine energy instead of spirit energy. A number of Tao lords have reported that they sense its existence as ominous, but they can't tell why. Well, hurry up and have the Library of Heaven enter the Artika realm. If we can access their repository of information, we won't need to rely on these organizations for all our data. They keep too much information hidden. I'll work on it, but the library does as it wishes. Instead of responding to our invitation, I heard it catalog the invite inside a history book. Well, find some other way to look this up. We have more important things to worry about than some new ore. They did not. They really did not have anything more important to worry about than that ore. They just didn't know that. 1579 Meanwhile 3. Do you know of the butterfly effect? The man asked as he looked out at the dark horizon. If there were others in his company, there was no evidence of it, for no one responded to him. The butterfly effect suggests that small changes in initial conditions can lead to vastly different outcomes. For example, a flap of a butterfly's wing in one galaxy can cause a cup of hot chocolate to cool down quicker in another. I'm not sure that's how that's supposed to go, someone finally said, the doubt in their voice easily identifiable. That's not the point. The point is, we're in this situation, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here, but I realize that there really is no better option. It's frustrating. We've been given the ultimate gift but it's dangling right in front of us, yet we can't take it. No one else in the room spoke. Not all of them agreed with the man in this particular circumstance, but they didn't know how to voice their opinions. The man kept looking into the distance as if some answer would come from afar, riding on a white horse, and solve his problems. But that wasn't how things worked. He would have to solve his own problems. When we came to the midnight inn as refugees, when the earth was invaded and we were left with nothing, it was an immense loss. It was a loss we have not recovered from to this day. Yet it was also the greatest opportunity we have ever gotten. A land filled with spirit energy. Access to amazing cultivation techniques. Rare resources growing on the trees right in our backyards. Exposure to the greatest powers and civilizations in the origin realm. We got it all. It was a huge price we paid for it, but we got it all. Vigor filled the man's voice as he monologued, yet as he approached the end of his sentence, his energy seemed to fade. But what's the point? He asked helplessly. Every civilization we meet, humans are weak and pathetic. They have clear disadvantages in their cultivation, and they have to do double the work, use double the resources only to achieve the same results. Only the Jotun Empire is different, yet even they are nothing but puppets for another. It is a failure of an empire. In this universe, the human race has nowhere where they can claim to have an advantage, nowhere but the midnight inn. Slowly a flicker of some deep emotion passed through the man's eyes, and he turned to look at the people in the room. In the midnight inn, humans are not weak. In the midnight inn, humans grow stronger faster than anyone else. They have the backing, the resources, the potential, they have everything. Everything except the will to do anything with that power. They just want to serve others. The man said the last sentence with distaste, as if it was the most disgusting thing he'd ever heard. Look, boss. There's nothing we can do about it. Just living in a minor realm connected to the inn is a huge boon. Why don't you just dash? Just nothing, the man roared. These goddamn peace hippies don't know the treasure they have. If instead of an inn, they just mobilized an army, they could be the strongest human force in the realm. Heck, they could start setting the foundation for expansion, take over more realms. Instead, they just smile and greet peasants weaker than them. It's disgusting. They could cultivate, they could grow stronger, live however they wanted, and no one would persecute them. But for those who had ambition, it was like the fiercest prison. They had not the strength to face the inn, nor could they live in it, yet they also lacked the courage to leave it behind. 826. Everyone in the room just exchanged glances but said nothing. Their boss, he was a man who wanted conquest, but was trapped in a place he could do nothing. For anyone who wanted a peaceful life, the inn was an absolute paradise. They could cultivate, they could grow stronger, live however they wanted, and no one would persecute them. But for those who had ambition, it was like the fiercest prison. They had not the strength to face the inn, nor could they live in it, yet they also lacked the courage to leave it behind. But I have a plan, the man said, quickly calming down. We're going to infiltrate the inn. We're going to get jobs there, and become a part of their What's this? The man suddenly paused his speech, and moved his hand in the air in front of him, as if he was interacting with something. Of course I have grand ambitions, the man said, as if responding to a question no one else heard. Before anyone could ask him what he was talking about, the man disappeared, startling the group. They tried to look for him, call him, send him a message or contact him in any way. Yet they only received silence in response. Suddenly they felt afraid, as if the inn had punished their boss. The days passed and they never heard from their boss again, nor did they ever mention him either. It was an event that went mostly unnoticed, like a single flap of a butterfly's wing. Through some strange coincidence, no one realized that similarly, all across the origin realm, many ambitious people disappeared. Yet being ambitious was not enough. Everyone who disappeared just happened to be in a position where no one would notice their absence. No one noticed the slight silent shift in the realm's destiny. The karma of the whole realm remained relatively unaffected, so there were no traces for anyone to detect. For all intents and purposes, such an event never happened. As such, no one noticed when a relatively mundane realm in the universe, one that was destined to never reach full maturity, suddenly gained 100 trillion new living beings. All of them had the grand conquest system, and all of them had 100 followers to begin developing their territories, and set off on a conquest to establish the strongest civilization. The boss who had just been complaining about the wasted potential of the inn began to smile as he understood more and more about his situation. After all, alongside the system, the territory, and the 100 followers, he'd also unlocked the ability to refine anything he touched into its purified form. That, especially for a cultivator, was a very strong ability. 1580 Return my flower. Lastly, just manipulating laws is actually the wrong way to go about things, Lex told Z, his lecture so far detailed and educational. Directly using laws might sometimes be appropriate, but for the most part is a telltale sign of a new immortal. The correct thing to do is increase your understanding of laws enough to create lawcrafts. All around them was silence. The armies that the castle had summoned had disappeared, and there were no locusts in sight. This was because once Lex was satisfied with his test for the castle's weapons, Lex told Luther to stop, and began testing out the other means at his disposal. That meant the Midnight Battalion was deployed, who did a very decent job at killing the Locust King and the hordes of enemies. Still, that was not enough to cease the onslaught. According to Cayman, though there were many enemies in Abaddon, they did cease attacking after a time. Usually it was better to just run away though. Naturally that is not what the tavern did. Instead, Lex asked Luther to attack. Now, Lex wasn't expecting Luther to just go ahead and end the fight. In truth, he was just testing out the powers and abilities at his disposal so he knew what to do when the time came. Lo and behold, Luther did something that Z had been trying to do and transformed. He used his hellfire, which granted him an ability similar to the devil's, which allowed them to assume their devil form. Devil transformations usually allowed them to take on a shape similar to Hellions. That included famous Hellion races such as Ifrits, Iblis, Hellspawns, and so forth. What Luther transformed into was similar to an Azura, the universally known race for having anger management issues, and the strength to back it up. Back up the reputation of Azuras he did. As it turned out, Luther had gained special expertise in fighting against large groups of enemies while he worked in the dungeons with Erebos. Combined with his bloodline that granted him near limitless power, Luther just went out and wiped out all the locusts. There hadn't been a single one for a while now, which allowed Lex to educate Z in detail. Luther, on the other hand, retreated to the recovery pod. Using his bloodline was like borrowing power from his future self. Whenever he wasn't fighting, he liked to pay off his bloodline debts as quickly as possible. Maintaining them meant that he had to continue using his bloodline, which in itself was draining, requiring him to take on more debt. So, whenever he ended a fight, he would go into a recovery pod and expedite his recovery while paying back the largest amounts of energy as quickly as possible without crippling himself. Just as when you began cultivation, you had access to chi instead of spiritual energy, becoming an immortal means getting access to laws. The way chi training cultivators fight is to use chi to empower themselves. But the proper, more effective way to fight is to use spiritual techniques. Similarly, lawcraft is using a law, or multiple laws to create a unique set of rules or effects. Think of it as a spiritual technique on steroids. Learning another's lawcraft is extremely difficult, for it would require gaining a minimum level of understanding of specific laws equal to that of the person who created the lawcraft. Considering how tenets make everyone perceive laws differently, it's almost impossible to gain the same understanding of laws as someone else. That is why it is important to create your own lawcraft. Yeah, but I can't just craft a new lawcraft out of nowhere, Z stated. Even the techniques I use, each transformation I show, all of it requires hours, days, or weeks of testing, theorizing, studying, and even then my techniques are flawed. I can't make one up on the go. Lex looked at Z and tried to hide the look of pity in his eyes. When you go back to the inn, you can go meditate on the new brimming dream lotus. A special meditation room is being designed just for it to inspire enlightenment in whoever uses it. That should help you create your techniques. Until then, do as much research and learn as much as possible so that when you encounter your enlightenment, you have enough material to complete your technique. While Lex tried to hold back the pity in his eyes, Z tried to hold back the irritation. Lex was talking about enlightenment like it was a beverage he bought in a cafe on the weekends. Actually, finding enlightenment within Abaddon is quite easy, said Cayman as he walked up to the two. There's a black flower that grows in the wild here, and eating one of its petals causes instant enlightenment. Eating 2 petals causes extended law comprehension. If someone eats the whole flower, their entire spirit will be purified, such that their ordinary thoughts become akin to a low-level, weak enlightenment. Z and Lex both suddenly stared at Cayman with intense eyes, filled with an intense hunger and also anger. Cayman, why don't you tell me what other, valuable opportunities can be found in Abaddon? Lex asked, straining to keep his tone civilized. No wonder a joint quest didn't offer any rewards. In fact, Lex was increasingly feeling like coming to Abaddon itself was a huge reward. He was planning on spending the next century or so in the Earth Immortal realm to maximize his strength and enhance his understanding of the realm. However, if he could get his hands on a couple of those black flowers and whatever else Abaddon might have to offer, then the heavenly immortal realm might be just on the horizon for him. Hey, just because it exists doesn't mean it's easy to get. The flower is protected by dash. Listen, Cayman, you don't understand, said Z very seriously. It's very rude to burden others. If someone out there is straining themselves protecting my flower, then it's only right that I should make haste to relieve them of that burden. You don't need to worry about how they'll react, for you see, Lex is very convincing when he talks to others. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to return my flower to me once he has a chat with them. 1581 Anklet of Narn. Cayman looked oddly at Z. His flower? Since when did the black flower become Z's? Come now, Cayman, you can see how distraught little Z is over his lost flower. Don't hesitate to share the details. You know what they say? Helping others is accumulating good karma. You never know when it might come in handy. While we're on the topic, I forgot to mention I also lost a few of my items on the way over here. Why don't you tell me about all the opportunities you've encountered while here so I can tell if some of them might be mine? Up until that very moment, Cayman had a pretty good impression of Lex. Although he did not seem to take the danger of Abaddon seriously, he was not without his own merits. Yet such blatant display of shamelessness gave him new insight into his human host. He was honestly impressed, and decided that a friendship with Lex would be very beneficial. We've encountered both great treasures and incredible horrors. For example, the black river that's flowing right behind the castle is actually the blood of a dead defiler. Such a thing cannot be considered a treasure, yet it can be considered one of the most ruthless poisons in the universe. Getting your hands on a single drop of it would normally be hard. Unfortunately, this blood is so particularly potent that we cannot find a container strong enough to actually contain it. Lex looked towards the water and studied it for a moment. He did not need to test it out, he could tell, even from afar, that touching even a drop of the river would not only poison him, it might even be lethal, giving him very little time to react. In fact, in its current state, even the castle tavern might not survive the corrosion of that blood. Fortunately, the river had dug deep into the land, forming natural walls around its path, ensuring that it wouldn't spill over. For a moment, Lex thought about how he might be able to buy something from the system interface to store that poison. He had a few ideas, but for that he'd need to upgrade his gift shop. Currently it seemed that he had hit kind of a plateau with what he could purchase for the gift shop, and it really wasn't very attractive towards a mortal. Lex suspected that if he upgraded his system functionality, he might be able to get better rewards. Previously, he did not want to upgrade his system because he didn't want to get pulled into any trouble above his level that it might throw at him. But the very existence of joint quests, which could not be denied, as well as competitive quests and Lord only knew what else, meant that reason was no longer valid. The system was pushing him towards danger regardless of what he did, so he needed to adjust his strategy. Now, he needed to grow stronger personally, as well as strengthen his system faster than the problems he faced so that he never lost his advantage. Cayman, I'll be frank with you. This place is filled with dangers, but it's also filled with opportunities that we won't find anywhere else. I think you'll soon learn that unlike the previous reinforcements you have received, those from the inn are not so weak. I think, while searching for the chalice to complete your quest, if we join hands and harvest some of the dangerous opportunities to be found in these lands, it will benefit us all. Cayman's instincts were to reject Lex, but then he paused and looked at the empty lands around them. He especially took a long time to study Luther, who looked depressed that the Black Knight hadn't been caught. It wasn't like the Reaving Dread mercenaries hadn't been able to kill locusts or locust kings. If that were the case, they wouldn't have survived 7 years here. In fact, they had even gone head-to-head against the chimeras, who were arguably much more powerful than anything the inn had faced. Even so, he had to admit, the creativity of those from the inn allowed them to kill with much more ease than the mercenaries. It seemed he needed no argument greater to convince him of the inn's might than the empty lands around the castle. I will prepare a list of things we've found here in the past 7 years. There is, however, a single item that I want to bring to your attention. I saw it once from far away, yet the very sight of it granted me knowledge of what it contained. If we can get our hands on that, I believe both the condottiere and the innkeeper will appreciate it. It was 4 years ago, and I saw it flying away in the distance, too far out of reach. It was being chased by a ferocious creature the likes of which we cannot even hope to face. It was at the very peak of the celestial realm. So long as that creature is still chasing that item, we cannot get it. But if an opportunity presents itself... Cayman became silent, just the thought of it captivating him. What was the item? Z asked, clearly not a fan of the suspense. Cayman looked towards Z for a moment, and then spoke. It was called the Anklet of Narn. Contained within the anklet was an entire galaxy. Lex's eyes widened in surprise, though not because of the reason Cayman expected. Anklet? Lex already knew about the Bangle of Narn, and thought it was a unique item. In fact, it was a unique item in the universe, considering it showed up in the list of options when he used his unique opportunity token. But now there was an anklet as well? Clearly there was a lot more to this than there appeared to be. More than the accessories, Lex began to wonder about Narn. What was Narn? Or perhaps he should be asking who was Narn, and why did all his jewelry contain galaxies? 1582 Secrets of Death. You're absolutely right. Getting our hands on such a thing would probably make both of them very happy, but I don't see myself being able to fight off a celestial immortal, Lex said, not expressing his thoughts on the anklet itself. Z rolled his eyes, as if he didn't believe Lex at all. The man got a living heavenly immortal dragon body as his cultivation mat long before he became an immortal himself. Now that he was approaching the heavenly immortal realm, Z wouldn't be surprised if Lex got himself a celestial-level cultivation mat. In fact, Z quickly pulled out a notebook and wrote down celestial-level cultivation mat before becoming a heavenly immortal on it. The book was filled with countless other outrageous things Z and some of the other workers at the inn theorized Lex would do. At the top of the list was Kiss a Lord, which was a surprisingly popular guess among the workers. There was another one that guessed he would refine his body cultivation inside the core of a star, and another that stated that he would master a brand new intent to the 5th level in a single day. Though Lex did not specifically look at the book in Z's hand, Lex was aware of everything that concerned him within a certain region. As such, not only did he know the contents of the book, he even knew Z's thoughts. He chose to ignore them for now. Abaddon is nothing if not unpredictable, Cayman said, probably for the 100th time. Never assume that you know what to expect and never get complacent. Lex nodded. Come, Cayman. Let's return to the tavern. There's much we need to talk about, but I think it's best you use this time to recover first. We can discuss things in greater detail once you're in good health. I can't help but notice a couple spots on your back that look like they might have been attached to wings or something. If you've lost limbs, then the tavern has a reconstruction room that you should check out. As they returned to the tavern, Lex couldn't help but notice that the horizon in the distance was beginning to darken. Night, if such a thing existed in Abaddon, was coming, and Lex had an ominous feeling about that. According to his estimation, at the rate that the sky was darkening, it would take about 50 hours for night to completely descend. He needed to find out if there was anything specific to expect before then. Not really, said Cayman when Lex asked. The night and day cycle is several months long, and a single night lasts 6 weeks while daytime lasts about 8 weeks. While the night is not safe or anything like that, it's not particularly anything special either. At least, we've never encountered any special dangers related to the night before. Lex, however, was certain that things would not be so simple for them. Maybe it had to do with the Dark Knight who had tried to target him. Z, you talked to the Knight during your fight. Did you learn anything from him? Yes. He said he was also from Earth before he died, though I don't know if I should believe him. Before he died? Lex repeated. His words exactly, Z confirmed, which caused Lex to stop in his tracks and wear a visible frown. Lex had long become used to controlling his expressions and revealing only what he wanted to reveal. But sometimes, he did not need to hide how he actually felt. The secrets of life and death were some of the most elusive secrets in the universe. No one he knew ever even hinted at knowing the truth of what happened after death, or how a soul was formed. Sure, many had mastered the way to induce the formation of a soul within a vessel of some sort, whether it was organic or inorganic. Heck, even cloning could induce the birth of a soul. But the exact nature or origin of a soul remained a mystery. Sure, some deities could protect and collect the souls of their devout worshippers. Lex had, for a time, thought that there was something to their power. Later, he learned that deities basically transformed the soul into something akin to spirits. Regardless, no one knew what happened after death. Now, Abaddon had someone who claimed to have died? Not to mention that the description of Abaddon itself mentioned that dead souls are attracted to it. Lex still found it unlikely that he could just stumble onto the secret of life and death so easily, but his curiosity had been piqued. Z, you must capture that Knight. I feel like he's hiding a great secret that will be useful for us to know, Lex said, his voice unexpectedly solemn. Normally, Z would have just rolled his eyes and taken this as one of Lex's many setups to show off later on. However, even he could feel that with the coming of night, a grave danger was steadily approaching. Lex himself could have tried to capture the Knight, but since he had already given the task to Z, he didn't want to step in unless needed. Lex took one more look at the darkened horizon, before turning back towards the castle. Tell me, Cayman, have you ever had ice cream? I know you flame affinity beings avoid cold things, but I find mixing cold and hot provides an enjoyable experience when it comes to desserts. Ice cream? I am not familiar with this, Cayman said with a hint of doubt, unsure what that had to do with the solemn topics they were just talking about. Well, it's a great time for you to learn about them. Now, normally I'd say you start your introduction to ice cream with simple, classic vanilla. However, I feel like we can take things a step further. An ice cream milkshake sounds just like the thing that will help you with your recovery. Okay. 1583 Sleepover vibes. Lex gave one last look to the empty lands of Abaddon before turning back towards the castle. Put the castle in high alert mode, Lex sent a message to Luther. During the night, don't let anyone go beyond the walls. I have a bad feeling about the darkness. For this mission, a chain of command had been established by Lex since he didn't want to get bogged down with defense. Leonidas would manage the battalion, but that was all. Whether the battalion would fight from the walls or go out into the field would be determined by Z, who was overseeing the defenses. Above Z was Luther, who would be controlling the entire castle from the Great Hall, and would make adjustments where needed. The castle had 2 weapons that could be used, true, but it also had a number of defensive formations and abilities which required someone to use them from within the Great Hall. Lex, meanwhile, would oversee the guests while the tavern was deployed. He wanted minimal involvement with the defenses, and would only get involved if the others were unable to handle things. While the castle was withdrawn, and the staff had to traverse the lands of Abaddon alongside the Reaving Dread, Lex would play a much more active role in the defenses. But until then, he wanted to take this opportunity to allow the workers to gain some much-needed experience. He relied on them heavily when it came to actually running the inn, yet there were a lot of areas in which they could improve their skills and capabilities. As they once again entered the walls of the castle, secure behind its giant, sturdy walls, the many defensive formations of the castle activated. The castle took advantage of its location to fuse its energy reserves with that of the energy within the land, gaining a much greater bank of energy. A powerful aura, similar to, but not quite as powerful as Dragon's Might, began to exude from the walls. Many layers of invisible defenses were erected, protecting the tavern from many unconventional threats, a trick Lex learned from watching how the system had strengthened the Midnight Realm itself. Countless lights were also lit up, even though the night had not yet fallen. Within the darkness, the castle would become a beacon of light, visible from all around, making it an obvious target. However, Lex knew all too well how powerful darkness could be. He would rather become a target than risk allowing the influence of darkness enter his tavern. The armies of hellhounds and wyverns filled the grounds of the tavern, just in case some enemies somehow managed to sneak into the castle, bypassing the walls. Even though it was unlikely, with the warnings Cayman had given against and again, as well as the threat Lex felt approaching, they decided to take no risks. Within the castle itself, the mood was light and easy. The staff workers all saw to the mercenaries with a smile on their faces and a relaxed demeanor. It was as if everything was well in hand. None of the seriousness and severity that filled the grounds of the castle could be detected within. Yet Cayman had already detected the difference. He had seen how nonchalant Lex had been no matter how much Cayman told him to be serious, and he could see how seriously he treated the arrival of night. When he kept in mind what Lex had said about human instincts, he felt like they were in for a rough night. As such, not only did he immediately go into a recovery pod and actively work towards healing as quickly as possible, he sent down orders for the entire mercenary group to return to their top form before night fell. Although they would not be needing to fight, an assurance those from the tavern had given them time and time again, Cayman preferred if his men were at least in fighting condition even if it wasn't needed. From the highest tower in the castle Lex observed Abaddon. The darkness of night here was not total. Instead, the sky was filled with a deep, dark red hue. The temperature had dropped rapidly, and an eerie silence had fallen over the land. Even the river of black blood became stationary at night, no longer daring to flow lest its noise attract something dangerous. Cayman had said that they never encountered any additional dangers at night, but Lex could tell that the same would not be true for them. He could feel it. It was out there, somewhere in the darkness, studying the castle. He could feel its gaze, but could not tell where it came from. Whatever it was dastardly dangerous, an unknown horror, targeting them for unknown reasons. There was, at least, one thing Lex could confirm. While he had originally thought that the danger from the night was due to the black-armored knight, he could now more or less confirm it wasn't due to him. "Come, break your bones on my castle walls," Lex said softly into the darkness. "Test your claws against our swords. Send your gravest horrors." Darkness does not scare those named after midnight. After all, within our walls reside the true nightmares. Lex's voice was low, barely loud enough to travel to the end of the room, yet something outside the walls seemed to have heard him nonetheless, and accepted the challenge. From within the ground around the castle, shadowy figures rose, as if ghosts and wraiths emerging from the underworld. Red clouds filled their ruthless eyes, and the wails of anguish of countless souls formed their armor. Their weapons were curses physically manifested, and their power was that befitting an immortal nightmare. Yet for all the bravado of their appearance, not a single hint of fear flashed through the hearts of those manning the castle walls. There was no war cry, no preamble. The fight began suddenly, the sound of the first clash booming through the sky like in a stormy sky. The sound traveled within the walls of the castle itself, but instead of evoking fear or doubt, it made the atmosphere even cozier. Well, what do you know, the mood is basically setting itself up. In that case, here's your drink. That ought to help you take a deep nap. The koala beast grabbed the mug of warm milk that was bigger than its body, nodded to the bartender, and quickly moved to the side. Guys, one of the staff members from the tavern had the idea to roast marshmallows of Cayman's smoldering flames, someone in the bar suddenly yelled. Can you believe that? The castle actually has marshmallows. Don't fight me, I want the first round. A round of laughter erupted in the room until they realized the man who spoke was being serious. Then they got up and started to run. From another room, a number of iguana beasts stepped in. But instead of their usual armor, they were wearing night suits that looked like they came out of the 1960s. Guys, check this out, one of the iguanas said. There's a tailor in the castle who makes these cloth armors that are stronger than our traditional armors. As if attracted by the idea of stronger armor, all the mercenaries followed the iguanas, but the line for the tailor shop was already long. After every 20 minutes a beast would step out, either wearing a suit, a kimono, a dress, or any number of distinctly styled dresses. The tailor had a wide selection of styles available now, and what each mercenary wanted, they got. There was a parrot beast who dressed up like a pirate, and not protective eyewear in the form of see-through eye patches. Within the castle, the mood was as cozy and relaxed as it could possibly be. Only Cayman seemed unable to relax, as if he was expecting something bad to happen. Outside, the pitter-patter that was heard inside the castle could much more clearly be heard. It was not rain that fell, but the blood of those who invaded the midnight castle. Yet, just as Lex said, all they could do is break their bones against the castle walls and die outside looking in. 1584 Warning. Lex continued to observe the battle without a single shift in his expression. It was as if the death of those countless spirits did not affect him at all. Nor did he respond to the fact that, with every single kill, the aura of the members of the Midnight Battalion increased ever so slightly. It was, as if, as they killed the spirits, the universe itself was rewarding them, imparting onto them a fleeting trace of good karma. Since they did not know how to utilize karma, their bodies instinctively absorbed it and transformed it into cultivation. The only reason Lex could tell all this at all was because of the new ability he gained to see karma. Yet the truth was, even if he himself received that karma, he was unsure about how else it could be used. He also pondered on the fact that something as illusory as karma could directly be converted into something tangible, such as cultivation level. This was something he needed to look into. But, more importantly, he wanted to understand why killing those things could reward positive karma. The same had not happened when the locusts were killed. As he continued to study the scene, Lex tried to use a system ability he had not used in a long time. He tried to activate realm law replication. Regrettably, the ability failed to work, though Lex already expected as much to a certain degree. New notification, realm law replication failed. According to the system's analysis, the ability has failed for the following reasons. Host is not inside a realm. Laws in the region are not fixed and thus cannot be replicated. The presence of universal rejection is detected. Quest update, optional objective, discover the secrets of Abaddon, partially updated. The existence of universal rejection has been detected within Abaddon. Discover the reasons behind universal rejection. Discover more secrets of Abaddon. New notification: universal rejection is a phenomenon where a being, item, phenomenon, energy, or other have their existence rejected by the universe, but for reasons unknown continue to exist within the universe. Helping correct universal rejection results is increased positive karma and/or universal affinity. New warning: the systems hereby affirm and warrant that they are in full and strict compliance with the universal mandate as it exists within the primary realm. Furthermore, the systems shall not engage with, provide support to, or operate in association with any hosts who are, for any reason whatsoever, subject to universal rejection. Such hosts shall be deemed incompatible, and any affiliation, direct or indirect, is expressly prohibited henceforth. Lex raised both his eyebrows in shock as he read the warning, not only because it was the first warning he'd ever gotten, it was also because of the mention of the universal mandate. Lex remembered that the Versailles Bank, in their mission statement, mentioned that they always adhere to the rules of the universal mandate. Back then, Lex had not taken it too seriously because he thought it was some matter of morality or law set up by some organization or power. Yet now even his system was taking the matter of the mandate very seriously. It seemed that the phenomenon of universal rejection had something to do with the mandate. It was possible that going against the mandate resulted in the rejection, but following the mandate was hard when he did not even know what the mandate was. In fact, even Mary did not know the mandates despite having been a Tao Lord previously. He also took note of how seriously the system took the matter of universal rejection, as if it was afraid of it. Why was the system afraid of that rejection, while the wraiths attacking the castle seemed perfectly fine existing with that rejection? He also found it interesting that Abaddon did not qualify as a realm, or that the laws that governed this place weren't fixed. Maybe the reason why Abaddon seemed so bizarre was because the laws of this palace kept changing, resulting in unusual events. Lastly, what the hell was universal affinity? Lex narrowed his eyes, feeling like this was probably one of the most important secrets he had stumbled onto. "Hey Mary, do you have any idea what universal affinity is?" he asked. "It's the name of a popular spa back in the Celestial Court," she said, appearing on his shoulder. The tagline was something along the lines of "after a treatment from here, you'll be shining like the universe's favorite idol." I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the actual line. Lex was silent for a moment before responding. "Somehow, I don't think that's the universal affinity I'm asking about." Mary shrugged her shoulders as if she couldn't help with the matter. "Just because I was a Tao Lord does not mean I know every secret of the universe. You know, I had my own things going on as well." "What were those things, if you don't mind sharing?" Lex asked once he knew he wouldn't be getting an answer. He was used to encountering mysteries without getting answers. "Can't say," she said, shrugging once more. "Girls' stuff. Boys aren't allowed to know." Lex rolled his eyes. What she really meant was that the system was forbidding her from telling. Lex continued to chat with Mary as he observed both the fight outside and the guests within the tavern. Now that there was nothing specifically for him to do, he summoned a bunch of clones, all of which began studying, meditating, or working on the many tasks that he had piled up. The majority of his focus, besides the tavern and the fight, was on studying and pondering karma. Since he could see karma, his comprehension of it had increased drastically, even though he didn't understand it just yet. The more he pondered on it, the greater he would understand. The next thing that took up most of his attention was law crafting. Lex's understanding of numerous individual laws was good enough, so now he needed to combine them in a way that best made use of them. He could not help but think back to his fight with Cornelius, the man who introduced the concept of lawcrafting to Lex. He used that fight as a reference to try and develop his own lawcraft. In this moment, besides adhering to his responsibilities, Lex was doing his utmost to grow far stronger than he already was. Clearly there was too much he didn't know about Abaddon, but he understood now that the ominous feeling he had been getting was from it which observed him from the darkness. He had a feeling that it was facing far greater universal rejection than the wraiths, and that it would be a great obstacle for him. Under his gaze, the hours continued to pass by. As the castle continued to withstand the invasion from outside, the mercenaries within restored their strength and recovered from their wounds. The hours turned to days, and then weeks. For those in the midnight tavern, everything was normal, but for the reaving dread mercenaries, a miracle was happening. For the first time since they arrived in Abaddon, they began to see hope even though their experiences told them that they should dare not hope. Like that, 6 weeks passed, and the darkness slowly turned to light, revealing a bright red sky once more. What interested Lex was that as the run rose, he discovered that they were no longer in the canyon. Instead, the castle was now situated atop an island surrounded by a deep purple liquid, filled with aquatic locusts. Cayman was confused by their teleportation, for it had never experienced such a thing before. At the same time, he was not surprised at all, because of course Abaddon would do something new. He merely told Lex that after 1 more week, the reaving dread would be as recovered as they could be in a short period of time, and so they would resume their journey. To recover completely, they would have to spend years within recovery pods, which was impractical. While so much time had passed within Abaddon, mere days had passed within the Midnight Realm. In that exact moment, however, a silence had spread over the Midnight Realm unlike any other. It was not just the living beings who were quiet. Even the wind dared not blow, the ground dared not rumble, the sky dared not move. It was as if, across the entire realm, an incredibly solemn aura had spread out, demanding the respect of all that existed. Back on Earth, while it was still in a dead zone, the death of a golden core cultivator used to cause a phenomenon where the sky turned red. That was actually as a result of the planet absorbing the concentrated and pure spiritual energy released from the body of a dead golden core cultivator, which was actually purer than ambient spiritual energy. In that moment, a similar scene was about to unfold in the Midnight Realm as a celestial immortal was about to die, and fertilize the realm with his blood. 1585 Stable Realm. Daoist Borin, I regret that this will be the last time we meet, Jotun said, ignoring the blood dripping from his forehead into his eyes. That was the sole injury on his body, mainly because the rest of the injuries were on his tenets, and on his soul. He was not nearly as unharmed as he appeared to be. Yet compared to the fiery mammoth who was sprawled on the ground in front of him, he was doing much better. You cannot be human, Borin said hoarsely, a delayed sense of horror gripping his very being. It was unfortunate that only now did he begin to feel fear. If he had even an inkling of what a monster Jotun was, he would have never agreed to this war. Oh, but I am, Borin. I am very much human. It's just that the universe has forgotten what a human can really do. After all, we are one of the most adaptable races in the universe. Jotun stepped forward towards Borin's fully grown body, appearing like an ant in front of an elephant. Yet appearances meant little, for in this situation, it was the ant that was the victor. He placed one foot onto Borin's body, and then bent down to place his hand as well. Farewell, Borin, and thank you for the gift, he muttered, before activating Black Hole. The fiery mammoth's body did not move. It did not shrink, nor did anything appear to change, save that the fire that covered its body was being sucked into Jotun's hand. Jotun closed his eyes, almost as if lost in a trance, and continued to use his ability till all the fire was consumed, and Borin fell limp on the ground, causing an earthquake. Oddly enough, the quake carried beyond the arena of the death match, and entered the Midnight Realm. A furious clap of thunder roared across the realm, threatening to destroy everything with pure sound alone, as the sky turned a deep shade of red, almost mimicking Abaddon. Jotun slowly opened his eyes, his pupils unfocused, as if recovering from a haze. Slowly, he raised his hand and whispered, "Ember." A small, orange flame appeared in his hand, a far cry from the roaring starfire he had absorbed from Borin. Yet this orange flame was so much more devastating, for it was another of the 8 ruling laws of the universe, Ember. With this, Jotun now had mastery over 3 of the 8 ruling laws, and so was ready to enter the 4th level of the celestial immortal realm. With a tribulation awaiting him, Jotun no longer cared about Borin's corpse, or the fight between galaxies, or anything else. He departed from the Midnight Realm. When he returned, he would be even stronger. The once silent Midnight Realm was now embroiled in a tumultuous uproar. It was not the people of the realm causing the noise, but the realm itself. The death of a celestial immortal was, by no means, an insignificant matter. Their existence was connected to the deepest, most fundamental laws of the universe. They could influence everything beneath the Tao, and as a result, they were also containers for the universe's most powerful laws. An immortal, whether they were earth, heaven, or celestial, got their immortality not from themselves, but from the universe itself. They were technically not immortal, it was just that their life was as long as the universe's, which might as well be the same thing. This was because, by becoming strong enough to get in touch with the laws, and some of the secrets of the realm, they also acted as an anchor for the universe's stability. These were secrets few knew, for it hardly even mattered. The point, however, was that the reserve of power within a celestial immortal would be released upon their death. Yet the Midnight Realm was too low level to contain the power of the 8 ruling laws which was unleashed upon Boren's death. Though, for some reason, the amount of energy released was far less than expected. Not that it mattered. Unlike an ordinary realm, which would strain and even fracture under the duress of such power, the Midnight Realm was reinforced by the system, and made stable by the actions of the galactic sovereign turtle. The Midnight Realm itself had a special law that allowed a heavenly tree to control the energy of the realm, yet the law was not complete, so as the realm came under stress, the laws began to rapidly advance. Instead of a single tree managing the energy of the realm, the law adapted to allow any mythical or sufficiently powerful tree to carry out the necessary actions. The void stabilization sequoia trees that the turtle had planted throughout the realm kept its space stable, and did not allow a single crack to form. The Bodhi tree sapling, which he may or may not have stolen when he turned Zuri into the Bodhi tree, began to grow by absorbing the ruling laws. The Bodhi tree could grant enlightenment even to immortals, yet as it grew, it granted enlightenment to the lotus who had fused with Manara, the continent on which the Midnight Inn was built. As the lotus entered enlightenment, it too began to absorb some of those additional energies running amok in the realm. The peach tree of immortality, the seeds of which it had taken from some mischievous monkey, began to sprout suddenly. While the turtle had not managed to get its hand on the saplings for the other trees of heaven, it had created the perfect conditions for those seeds to spontaneously form on their own, so a Yggdrasil sapling suddenly appeared, given birth to by the quickly growing realm. Yet the changes lasted only for a few seconds, for the energy from the celestial body was too little for the whole realm to absorb since most of it was missing. None of the guests noticed the changes at all. At most, they felt like the laws of the realm were a little stronger. "1586 Is she bipolar? The avarice of man will be their downfall," whispered Levi, looking at Jotun absorbing the ruling law from the still-living body of Boren. That human had the gall to try and master all 8 laws, as if that would somehow help him step onto the path of a Tao Lord. Unfortunately for him, unbeknownst to himself, he was setting the foundation of his own demise. After all, there was an open secret shared among those at the very peak of the celestial immortal realm, a secret so heart-wrenching that it practically forcefully ended the cultivation path for almost every being in existence. The secret about achieving the Tao was that. "Actually, I think dragons are a whole lot more greedy than humans, and they're doing fine," said Liz, who was sitting right next to Levi, staring up at the big screen and watching the fight. In her hand she held a hot dog. The Midnight Inn was magical. All she needed to do was wish for another hot dog, and it would appear in her hand, like magic. She would never again be left unsatisfied by the measly amount of food these public events served. Liz reluctantly admitted that the inn Lex worked for was pretty cool. "How did you hear me?" Levi gasped in shock as she stared at the mortal beside her. Levi, the Princess of Despair, was at the very peak of the celestial realm, a breath away from achieving the Tao. All she needed was a single push, one that had eluded her for centuries already. Since she did not trust the inn, or anyone at all for that matter, she relied on her own ability to erect walls around her. She stood in public, but she was supposed to be hidden both from view and from spirit senses. The little human girl beside her, though, did not seem affected at all by her ability, as if she did not care whether her barriers existed at all or not. "With my ears," Liz answered mischievously as she turned to look at Levi. Ever since she had completed her fusion with Nemo, Liz was feeling great. She was feeling better than great, she was feeling the best she had ever felt in her life. She could finally cultivate properly, and it was all because she had finally bonded with a beast. To top it off, that beast was a sovereign. The ability feedback Liz got from being bonded to a sovereign was so immense that, basically, it was impossible for her to control the ability she gained at all. At least it gave her a cool passive, the ability to ignore any barrier below the Tao realm as long as she wished for it. Her passive was a smidgen of the true power a sovereign held, but that smidgen was the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard. Unfortunately, she had not yet learned how to control that passive ability for now, as it seemed at the moment, she wished for all barriers constricting her to fade away. The ability also worked on some emotional or metaphysical level, for it allowed her to ignore the emotional barrier she had erected around herself as a form of protection. It allowed her to see that when she had reunited with Lex, he had treated her like her brother, despite everything, and she had treated him like an ass. She felt guilty about that, a feeling she was unfamiliar with, so for now she just focused on other things. Not like Lex was here right now for her to apologize anyway. That's not what I mean, and you know it. Levi exclaimed, puffing up her cheeks in frustration. Liz turned and looked down at the sentient stuffed toy that had somehow attained unimaginable power. Okay, fine. In truth, barriers don't work on me. There, now I've shared my utmost, deepest secret with you. If anyone finds out, they'll hunt me to the ends of the universe to capture my power. How will you compensate me for revealing such a secret? Levi was flabbergasted, her immortal mind coming to a freeze as she contemplated what the human in front of her had said. If it were true, then she really had revealed a massive secret to her. Such trust. All right, I'll accept hugging you as compensation, Liz said as she picked up the stuffed toy and gave her a hug. Right then and there, she felt invincible. It wasn't as if the universe would bend to her will. But at least she gained a bit of insight into the consequences of what she would do. For example, she could see that as long as she never lied to the stuffed toy, and treated her fairly, Liz could hug her as much as she wanted. No fair, I want to hug too. Nemo complained as he swam onto Liz's cheek. What the hell is going on? Levi asked, even as she positioned herself to be more comfortable in the hug. Liz laughed, took a huge bite out of her hot dog, and moved forward. She really felt like she was on top of the world. Fear not, little girl. For revealing your secret, I will offer you protection for a period of 5 years. Beyond that, I have commitments, so I will not be able to accompany you any longer, Levi said. Okay, Liz said, as if she was completely uninterested. Hey, if you don't mind me asking, how does a stuffed toy come to life? I am not a stuffed toy. Levi said firmly. I am a member of the Rosy Bear race. We are champions of the path of order and protectors of the universe. Sounds cool. What's the path of order? Liz asked as she hunted for more delicious food. Lex had given her a lot of MP that she could use, and she was going to spend it all on food. Just thinking about having to apologize to Lex made her work up an appetite. From within Abaddon, Lex watched Liz with a strange expression, wondering if his sister was bipolar. 1587 levels of intent. Is everything all right? Cayman asked as he noticed the odd expression on Lex's face. Yeah, everything is fine. I just saw someone really stupid, being stupid. I should not be too surprised, I don't know why I am. Of course, as an older brother, he thought his younger siblings were stupid, and his older sister had severe anger management issues. He felt pity for whoever dated her in the future. Do you mind if I ask you a question? Cayman said. Go ahead. I see that your forces are quite versatile in their means, Cayman said as he watched the Midnight Battalion hold back the latest push from the Locusts. As the morning light came, the race with the universal rejection disappeared, and the Locusts returned, dragging themselves out of the water and quickly morphing into a shape suitable for land. Many of them have mastered unique and powerful intents. Yet their use of intent is very amateurish at most, if you don't mind me saying. Why is that? Have you never focused on intent? For a moment Lex did not comment, only studying how the battalion used intent. They seemed fine to him. But then again, Cayman was a professional mercenary, so he was probably more informed in things related to combat than him. We are, after all, an inn. Although we have a security team and a battalion to fight, they have barely been training for a few years. I'm sure with time, their training will eventually address that as well. But for now, if you see any ways in which you can offer guidance, I'd be glad to take it. Admittedly, I myself have not focused too much on my intent. I don't think you of all people can claim to not have trained your intent, Cayman said. I recall how you used your intent to cut the connection between the locusts' fake souls and their bodies. But it is true that while your application of intent is genius, your actual intent is surprisingly not at the level I would have expected. I mean, I think my intent is pretty powerful, Lex said, recalling how he had to raise the level of his intent high enough to destroy that sword hiding in his soul. Cayman gave Lex a look that quite clearly meant that he did not want to disagree with Lex, but he couldn't agree with him either. All right, enlighten me. Teach me about intents, and teach me how I can improve them. Cayman paused for a moment, as it considered what to say, before it began. Let's start with the basics. What is intent? Intent is formed when a being gains extreme mastery over a particular field, any field at all. Their mastery causes a resonance, or a reaction of some kind with spiritual energy, which manifests the level of their mastery in the form as a force. A cultivator's internal spiritual energy causes the intent to be formed, and the external energy can power and fuel it. Of course, in the case that a cultivator is in a barren place, their own spiritual energy can be used to power the intent, but that is besides the point. The thing to focus on is that intent is dictated by two things, the level of mastery, and the cultivator's internal energy which causes it to form. Theoretically, it's entirely possible to form intent above one's cultivation level, it's just that maintaining it will be a strain. However, regardless of the cultivation level, without sufficient mastery, the intent will never grow. Now let's start with levels. Intent goes from level 1 to level 9, though there are legends about even higher levels. We'll discuss that in a moment, but first we need to look at the first few levels. From level 1 to level 4, mastering intent is relatively easy, and simply requires sufficient hard work and focus. For reference, your sword intent is at level 3, and my fire intent is at level 4. As you can imagine, with each level, the intent grows stronger and gains newer aspects of itself. Think of it like cultivation, the focus of each level is preparation for the subsequent level. Intents from level 5 to level 9 become much harder to master, because at those levels, intent is influenced by, or influences laws. The exact nature of the relationship is determined by the user and use case, but either way, the integration and application of laws make them much harder to master. At the same time, they are much harder to learn. The reason why I say that none of the in-workers seem to focus on intent is because while many have intent, and some even actively use it, almost none have gone past level 3. In fact, most of them are at level 2. Considering that sufficient practice and dedication can, at least, bring them to level 4, the fact that a majority of them are at level 2 is very telling of how much they prioritize intent. Lex nodded as he understood Cayman's point. He still didn't think they did anything wrong, as there was no telling what sufficient effort quantified. More importantly, while many mastered intent, almost none of them relied on intent as their main form of combat. It was more of an augmentation to their existing skills than anything else. That didn't mean Lex would dismiss Cayman's expertise. What's above level 9 intent that you mentioned? He asked. Well, according to rumors, if one surpasses intent level 9 in intent, their intent transforms into a Tao, and can no longer be called an intent. However, such things are easier said than done, and I at least don't know anyone or have heard of anyone who has achieved such a thing. A flash of interest went through Lex's eyes as he realized he suffered no pressure or consequence from learning this knowledge. Does that mean if I get my intent to cross level 9, I can become a Tao Lord? He asked. Cayman shrugged. These things are way past my pay grade. I'm just sharing a rumor I heard. There's no evidence of it being real. 1588 How do you plan on doing this? Lex spent a moment thinking about the possibility of elevating his intent to the 9th level and beyond, but then shook his head. There was no point getting ahead of himself. Everything needed to be taken step by step. So basically what you're saying is that everyone should at least bring their intent to the 4th level to maximize on this, more or less, given a power boost from intent. Well, since it only takes some time and effort, I see no reason why we can't incorporate a small training routine into every immortal's schedule. Sooner or later, they're bound to get there. Yes, well, of course the time to upgrade intent will be different for everyone, and if they spend more time focusing on it, then the time will be exponentially quicker than a small regular training routine. But, I suppose you're right. An immortal, training regularly, however little, will eventually reach the 4th level, whether it's in a year, a century, or a millennium. Any specific advice on how to go about it? Lex asked. I'll compile a detailed list for every one of your workers the next time we stop to take a rest. For now, I think I prolonged our stay enough. We should get going. Lex looked at Cayman, and then back at the battlefield in front of him. They had spent a number of weeks here already, but despite the long duration of time spent here, Lex didn't mind. Previously, whether it was in the Artica realm or in the Seraphim resort, he always felt a rush to return to the inn because he had work to do. Oddly enough, now that he was here, and had absolutely no idea when he'd be coming back, he felt less stressed. A part of it may be because Lex had been anxious about sealing the inn to avoid more problems cropping up, but now that actual problems had arisen, he was too busy dealing with them to think about them. It could also be because he knew that for all the risks it posed, Abaddon also provided him with immense potential for growth in his personal strength. Over the past few weeks, he'd seen it. This place was filled with monsters far surpassing his level. While countless wraiths attacked them, there were just as many heaven immortal or celestial immortal wraiths that just ignored them and passed by. This was due to the unique quality of Abaddon, where each thing only wanted to attack souls on the same power level as them. Of course, this was probably only true if no one provoked a stronger power. For example, Lex was certain that if he ended up grabbing the anklet of Narn, the creature that had been chasing the anklet would not just ignore Lex. It also helped that everything was going well within the inn. Now that Jotun's fight was over, the event was about to come to a close. The only reason that the specific event relating to Jotun's fight wasn't over already was because the Henali had to do an announcement about the end of the fight between the two forces. Now that the sun had risen and a week had passed, it was time for them to move on according to the schedule Cayman had given. Yet the magma lion had been delaying it for a couple of days already. Are you sure? Lex asked. He could guess what was going through the lion's mind. After 7 years of constant battle, he finally got some rest, and was in fact able to enjoy himself while he rested. He ate and drank, and spent time with his army without the constant threat of death hanging over them. Who would want to return to the battlefield after that? But the reality was that they had a job to do. Yes, we should leave now, Cayman said reluctantly. All right then, you can pass the order to your men to form up, and I'll pass the order to my workers to pack up the castle. Before we leave, however, I'd like to talk to you about a couple of things. Firstly, how exactly you're planning on getting off this island, and how exactly you're planning on finding the chalice. Crossing the liquid should not be too troublesome, unless it's as corrosive as the Black River. Teleportation is out of the question, and so is swimming. I cannot say for sure what our plan will be unless we test the liquid itself. This isn't the first time we've had to cross a lake or a river, so we're more than familiar with the process. In general, we rely on building ships from nearby materials and equipping it with strong formations that'll allow them to get us past whatever obstacle we're facing. The issue with the chalice, however, is much greater. By now, we have no means left except to continuously search the lands and hope to find clues, or to stumble upon it. Cayman, you realize that if we don't develop a better strategy, we could end up staying here for, I won't even say thousands of years. We could end up staying here forever. We have no other choice, Cayman lamented. We cannot scout the lands, and we cannot map the area using any treasures. You saw yourself what happened when you sent clones out into the lands. Any strategy we have thought of so far to search for it has failed. Lex frowned. Abaddon was a proverbial treasure trove, true, but Lex did not want to spend the rest of his life stuck here. If you don't mind, I'll also keep an eye out for ways we can expedite our search. Be my guest. In fact, I wouldn't mind if you completed the whole quest on my behalf. As long as the quest is completed properly, no one will care how it's done. One of the perks of being a mercenary. Don't tempt me, Cayman. My adventures tend to get out of hand. For now, I think I'll just focus on running my tavern. But if this ends up taking too long, no promises on what I might do. 1589 Mrs. Innkeeper. It did not take long after the orders were passed for the mercenary army to gather up, once again ready for combat, nor did it take long for the tavern workers to pack up everything and ready for the castle to pack up. But even once everything was ready, they did not depart immediately. It would be idiotic not to take advantage of the natural defense that the castle provided. Instead, 2 small mercenary teams were sent out, each with a different task. The first team was meant to go check out the properties of the purple liquid that surrounded the island they were on, while the other team went and collected raw materials from the island. Fenrir blessed both teams with his stealth abilities, so that they could easily avoid the army surrounding the castle, though for some reason Fenrir was acting very strangely. He seemed to be acting as if he had been captured by Little Blue, and quite a few mercenaries cheered to see him acting that way. Lex, meanwhile, began thinking of ways he could speed up the completion of the quest. The most important thing was to find a way to locate the chalice, and then reach it. The strange way in which Abaddon teleported them around the lands, or maybe moved the lands around them, made it difficult for them to navigate the area and make any actual progress on finding anything. Despite the many tools that the Inn gave him, he could not think of one that would help him in his given. He even considered maybe using the Innkeeper's business cards to summon projections of the Innkeeper, but dared not take the risk. There was no guarantee that there weren't any Tao Lord abominations within Abaddon, so summoning a projection would be suicide. After all, each creature only went for something on their own level, and didn't seem to have much intelligence. Intimidation wouldn't work on them, and his projections didn't actually have any real strength. So, he had to get a little extra creative with his ideas. There were things he couldn't do as the Innkeeper, and usually he did them with his identity as Lex. However, Lex was preoccupied, and he needed someone else at the inn who could do some minor tasks for him without asking questions. It would be perfect if Mary had a body, for she could have helped him out. Unfortunately, he'd have to rely on Mary simply passing out orders to someone else. "Mary, I need you to talk to John for me," Lex said as he watched the 2 mercenary groups sneak out of the castle. "I need him to coordinate with the 2 rhino centaurs for me." "Got it," she said, and listened closely to his instructions. John was meditating in a meditation room, cycling through his cultivation technique. It was quite odd, needing to cultivate actively. Even after all these years without a system, he still couldn't get over the feeling that his cultivation should just rise on its own after a good assassination. Every day, he got the feeling like something was missing from his experience. It was like a nagging feeling in the back of his mind that he just couldn't ignore. But he had to ignore it. He was a different person now, and lived a different life now. Suddenly, a projection of a small, floating redhead appeared in front of John. "Hey John, how's the recovery going? Still have the phantom feeling of missing growth?" she asked. "Yeah, it's not really going away," he groaned, and then turned to look at her. This was Mary. John had no idea who Mary was, or what her actual role in the inn was. All he knew was that only the workers of the inn could see her, and that everyone referred to her as second boss. Although he never said it out loud, mostly because the other workers were much too simple-minded about such things and he wasn't sure how they'd react to gossip about the Innkeeper, but he suspected that she was the Innkeeper's wife or girlfriend or something like that. Mrs. Innkeeper, if you will. Of course, he would never say that out loud. But it made sense, right? She passed out the Innkeeper's orders even when no one could meet him, knew all his secrets, and basically oversaw the running of the inn more than anyone else. Of course, a much more reasonable, much less scandalous conjecture was that she was the innkeeper's student, just as how everyone suspected Lex was the innkeeper's student. Also, she gave really good advice sometimes, and knew all the workers by name and had a personal relationship with them. Just like a good housewife overseeing her husband's estate. Have you ever considered taking that feeling and trying to create a technique that personifies that feeling? You're really good at creating spiritual techniques, so why not try and create a cultivation technique? For a moment John was stunned. He'd never even thought of creating his own cultivation technique. Yeah, maybe I'll try that. Let me know how that works out for you. But right now, we have some work to do. John stood up straight, as if ready to receive his orders, and tried to ignore the amused expression on Mary's face. You need to go to the rhino centaurs and ask them to see if they can acquire the best, most effective scouting or mapping equipment or treasures. Lex is on a very precarious mission, so I'll be communicating between him and you, and you'll have to communicate with the rhino centaurs on his behalf. The situation is a little complex, so we can't be certain what exactly we'll need. John nodded and quickly geared up before leaving his home above the battle axe. Yet the very moment he left, the divide given to him by the rhino centaurs to detect systems began to vibrate. He took out what looked like a phone and saw the notifications piling up on it. The number of systems detected within his vicinity were 99 plus. John suddenly paled and looked around. What the hell was going on? 1,590 working overtime. Mary, we have an emergency. John suddenly exclaimed, his eyes fixed on the device. Each moment it vibrated, alerting him of another system nearby. John almost thought that the machine was malfunctioning. Almost. As a former system user himself, he was much too familiar with the circumstances and mentality of a system user. He understood the subtle way in which they thought as they tried to fulfill their quests, and could easily notice the dazed look on a system user's face when he was actually looking at their system interface. Of course, such things could only be noticed on absolutely brand new system users, and not more experienced ones. Even so, a single sweep around Main Street was enough for him to spot a dozen such people. What's absurd was that these people actually thought they were being sneaky. What's wrong? She asked, appearing above him, wearing the formal suit of a high-ranking military officer. She had a dozen pins on her shoulder, and all of them were awards for eating the most in competitions. Mary, there. I need to talk to the innkeeper immediately, he exclaimed. There are hundreds of system users just on Main Street. There might be thousands or tens of thousands of system users within the inn right now. Mary did not hesitate, her expression turning serious as she disappeared to talk to Lex. Lex himself was watching the mercenaries test the purple liquid secretly, and he could already tell crossing it would be a problem. The liquid has strong hallucinogenic properties, so much so that the mercenaries themselves had not realized that they had begun to act oddly. Cayman had to send a second team to rescue the first team. When Mary informed him of what John told him, Lex was first confused. But almost instantly he realized that all the security they got were probably system users. That made sense, since the Reaving Dread, their regular security, was also a part of the system. He remembered that the fancy monocle was an old version of a product that the Infinity Emporium used to sell, something he suspected was a system. By now, he was almost certain that all systems were somehow connected. Maybe the staff that he hired for the system were also created through some system. Lex needed to think of how he could take advantage of this opportunity. The problem was, the 10,000 metric tons he had spent was for security of the deathmatch event, which would end in the next few hours within the inn. He had no time to waste at all. This was even more so since the next few hours in the inn might be mere seconds in Abaddon, or it could be weeks. There was no telling. Lex's mind started to work in overdrive, making use of the full capacity that being an immortal had afforded him. He immediately went through the list of all the new security that had been hired, and noticed that they ranged from chi training all the way to the very peak of the celestial realm. In fact, speaking of the celestial realm, Lex recognized the celestial bodyguard he had hired once. After identifying all the new security guards, he immediately began to review every action they had taken since they entered the inn. Within a baton, came and noticed that Lex had started to sweat, and smoke was rising from above his head. An immense amount of energy was running through his body. A solemn expression covered the magma lion's face as he realized that Lex was probably using some powerful technique to probably figure out a way to find the chalice. He really was a swell guy. No wonder the Midnight Inn was so popular, the service was really over and beyond. The sweat on Lex's brow began to evaporate as he pushed himself to his limits, reviewing the actions of millions of guards. Yet he quickly came to the conclusion that such an action was impractical. If he had more time, he would have been able to do it. But since he couldn't afford to waste a single second, he decided to refine the process. He once again went over the list of all the security, and then narrowed down the list by prioritizing certain system users. He decided to check up on the absolute strongest and the weakest. There was a certain logic behind that. He needed to watch out for the actions of the strongest, and see if they had any ulterior motives. As for the weakest, they were potential targets for Lex to possibly hire to the inn. It was also possible to find, among them, some that might not want systems. As long as they were below the nascent soul realm, he could remove their systems from them easily. "Mary, I have an idea," Lex said. "I want to create a distinct group of customers, guests who can be considered to be members of a certain level of the inn. It'll be like the inn prestige level, but different, because only select members can get it, people I choose. Can you make the system make it happen? You know that's not how it works. At the very least, you'll need to complete a quest for the system to do something for you first." Lex's mind ran through a few possibilities, and quickly came up with a solution. Even though he had spent 10,000 metric tons on security, he more than made up for it in the following hours, not to mention in the income from the bets on the actual match. At the moment, he had 31,001 metric tons accumulated. This was an opportunity he could not miss, so he quickly came up with an idea for a new, exclusive event, and quickly began going through the event panel. He was more than ready to pay a huge amount for this event, but in the end discovered that for everything, he'd only need to spend a single MT. His understanding of money was really screwed up if he thought of 1 metric ton as only, but now was not the time to focus on that. He selected the list of security guards, and then initiated the event.